Welcome, everybody. I want to wave propaganda at you for the museum. So if you're not a museum member, that if you love this talk, you'll do everything you can for the library, and you'll also help the museum out while you're at it. I also want to give a plug because some of you might have to vanish before we get to the Q&A part. And the museum has another Zoom presentation tomorrow evening at 6:30 our time. And that's, and you can go to the museum's website, which is dinnerwaremuseum.org, dinnerwaremuseum.org. And it's at 6:30. Mike Pratt, who's the world's authority on mid-century modern dinnerware, is going to be giving a presentation about his own collection, which is bigger than anything we have in the museum. And you won't want to miss that. So, and that's probably about 40 minutes long. So, and it'll be live Zoom, so no pre-record. So thank you very much for attending tonight.
All right, so I am going to share screen and start our video tour of A Perfect Pairing.
Hello and welcome to the first Special Collections After Hours of Fall 2022. So some of you may remember back before the pandemic, After Hours and Special Collections started as a series of very informal open houses where we just lay materials out on the tables. Then during the pandemic, we shifted to an online lecture format. And in 2022, we're going to kind of be doing a combination of things. So each individual event might be in a different format. So this event is entirely remote on Zoom. The October event is going to be a conversation in 660D up in Special Collections on the 6th floor Hatcher South. And then November and December are going to be our more traditional open houses where people come and go during that time period. So just make sure that you check not only the description of the event you want to go to, but also the format that it is happening in. We want to make sure that we include a variety of formats to allow as many people to participate as possible. We may also experiment with hybrid in the future, but with our small staff and limited technology, that's often challenging. So at the very minimum, we'll definitely have some remote and some in-person events. Now today, I am here with my co-curator, Margaret Carney of the International Museum of Dinnerware Design, and we are going to be talking about our exhibit down in the Audubon room, which is where we are standing right now, A Perfect Pairing, which is a partnership between the museum and between the Janice Bluestein Longone Culinary Archive. Oh, and by the way, I forgot to introduce myself, but I'm Juli McLoone. I'm one of the curators in the Special Collections Research Center. And I work in a variety of areas post-1700, but one of the biggest is the Janice Bluestein Longone Culinary Archive, which is, of course, what is featured in this exhibit today. So the JBLCA brings together a really diverse body of materials that relate to culinary history, everything from cookbooks and domestic household manuals to advertisements, so think like Jello pamphlets and baking powder awards, that kind of thing. Menus, manuscript recipe books, all sorts of different documents that allow us to get a view of not only what people ate in the past, but how they thought about it and how they envisioned themselves and their communities through food as well. So the JBLCA originated with Janice Bluestein Longone and her husband, chemistry professor emeritus, Daniel T. Longone, and they donated it to the university in the early 2000s, since which they've continued to be very involved in its further development through donations and consultation. And at this moment, I also just wanted to pause and take a moment to honor Jan Longone, who many of you may know passed away earlier this month. I first met Jan in 2015 when I first came here to the university, when her dining out exhibit, which some of you may remember, was on display up in the Clark Library in 2015. And this was an exhibit that stretched across decades and even centuries and across geography, looking at all of the ways and places that people eat outside of the home, in restaurants and cafes, and looking at it from the diner's perspective and the chef's perspective. And although I've only known her for a few years compared to the many people who've worked with Jan and Dan for decades, I feel really honored to have had a chance to experience Jan's incredible knowledge and her passion for culinary history. We very much feel her loss here in the library, as I know her loss is felt across the world. So as we take this moment to enjoy this moment in culinary history in this exhibit, I hope that you'll also all think of Jan. And with that, I will actually pass things to my co-curator.
Thank you so much, Julie. I'm really happy to be here today, and I want to mention also, I met Jan Longone with my husband when we joined the Culinary Historians of Ann Arbor, right when we moved here in 2012, and it was always my dream to do something with her archives, and fortunately, Julie and I have had this opportunity to work together on this exhibition, which we're going to tell you more about. But the International Museum of Dinnerware Design was established in 2012 here in Ann Arbor, and we celebrate everything to do with dining. We have more than 9,000 objects, I've kind of quit counting even though everything's cataloged, that are devoted to dining or reference dining if they're not utilitarian objects. And this exhibit shows a portion, a very small portion, but a fun portion of the collection. And we collect everything from functional dinnerware to larger sculpture that references dining in some way or another. And we also collect kitsch and tablecloths and napkins, paper napkins and disposable dinnerware and things like that. So we hope you enjoy this explanation and introduction to the show tonight. Thank you. For this exhibition, we paired 12 different groupings of objects from our two collections. And we're going to start first with, I don't know if it's the earliest, it's not, is it the earliest?
It is.
Okay. The earliest, which is on your left, is the Wedgwood piece, and this is a game pie dish. It's English, and I loved this immediately when I saw it because it represents faux food, and anybody that knows me knows I like to have faux food, which you'll see a couple of examples of in this exhibition. But this has a particular reason. Like, I don't love all Wedgwood, but I love this one because it has a story with it. So in 1795, roughly till about 1805, there was a flour shortage in England during the Napoleonic Wars. And Josiah Wedgwood came up with a genius idea, in my opinion, for creating game pie dishes. Now, the body that was used for this, which is caneware, was invented earlier on, maybe 1750 in Wedgwood's history. But this gave the illusion, when it was placed on a table where there was no flour, so they had no real pastries or anything, that they still had a pastry, and this would have been owned by probably a wealthier family. It has a ceramic liner inside it. It is ceramic and has a ceramic liner, so you could put something that didn't have any game in it, probably hardly at all, and absolutely no flour, but it looked like you still had that. And I love this because it relates to the frontispiece in the book that Julie's going to talk about.
Yeah, and so as I was selecting books for this exhibit, we actually selected the dinnerware first, and so then I got to dive into the JBLCA and find books that went along with them. So in this case, we have Maria Eliza Kettleby Rundell's A New System of Domestic Cookery from 1813. And so after she was widowed, Kettleby Rundell began collecting recipes and tips for her daughters, which culminated in the publication of this book, which has a really gorgeous frontispiece representing late 18th, early 19th century food. So you can see just an extravagance of various types of game that could be cooked into game pies that might go into a Wedgwood dish such as this. And in the recipes themselves, we find a green goose pie, which specifically references either bake them either with or without crust. If the latter, a cover to the dish must fit close to keep in the steam.
Next, we're going to look at some Staffordshire ware. This is transfer ware, circa 1838. And you might say, well, that doesn't seem that long ago. But if people ask me what's the oldest thing in the museum's collection, one of the oldest things that came from the United States but was actually imported from England is this set of dishes, which is very, very thoroughly documented by the family that donated it. And it was used in a lumber camp in Pennsylvania. One of the reasons it exists is because the family treasured it so much. I mean, you can see that there's dinged up knobs on pieces, and there might be a crack here and there, but think how old this is, and that it's amazing that something that's this old survived at all. But the family treasured it, so they were heirlooms with the Stevens family who donated it. This was thoroughly documented, besides with the family in handwritten notes, but also corroborated in the 1970s by the Smithsonian Institution's Curator of Ceramics and Glass.
So as I was looking for books to pair with the dinnerware in this exhibit, sometimes there's a very tight, direct, and obvious connection, and some of the pairings are a little bit more evocative and imaginative. So this is one where I had to really think through things, because one of the really interesting things about these dishes, being that it was used in a logging camp, well then I tried to think, well, how do I connect that to the books? Because the thing is, in the 19th century, I mean, just in general, actually, people frequently cook not from cookbooks, right? When's the last time you had to look at a cookbook to fry an egg? And particularly, people cooking in logging camps may not necessarily have been literate and may or may not necessarily have had a cookbook. So there wasn't really a logging camp cookbook of 1828 that I could pull out. So instead, what I looked for was things that were sort of contemporaneous and that might have dishes that might be similar, things that could easily be cooked for a large quantity of people in perhaps relatively limited cooking environments. So what we have here is the 1838 edition, which is the 22nd edition of Lydia Maria Child's The American Frugal Housewife, dedicated to those who are not ashamed of economy. So she's laying it right out there that this is for cooking cheap food for those who need to, and you can tell how popular it was by the fact that it went well into the 20 editions. This is the 22nd. And on this page we have a recipe for beans.
Who doesn't like pink for dishes? This particular set is from Harlan, from Limoges in France, circa 1879, and the pattern, in case you're keeping track, is Meadow Visitor. I can't say it in French, but you can go to the website to check out if your French is good. And what I love most about this set isn't just the imagery on it, which is quite pastoral, but it's wedding china. So it's wedding china for Magnus and Henrietta Butzel, who are from Detroit, or were from Detroit. He was a supporter of the Jewish community at the time and active in the Underground Railroad, as well as being a supporter of an early supporter of public libraries. There are 77 pieces in this set, and I wish we could put them all out because there's so many different casseroles and different pieces. You want to guess what they probably served in them. So that's 142 years with almost no cracks or chips, which tells you that either the descendants didn't use them too often or they just cherished them and took good care of them. So the names of Magnus and Henrietta Butzel are written in gold script on nearly all of the dinnerware pieces, not on the fronts, but on the backs of the pieces. The set was designed by a well-known Parisian flower painter, and some of them, you should note, are transfer designs, and other parts of the dishes are hand-painted.
So paired with the Butzel's dishes, we have an 1871 Jewish cookery book by Esther Levy from Philadelphia. And this is the first Jewish cookbook printed in America. So notable there, lots of cookbooks in general were imported from England and other countries throughout the 18th and 19th century. So this isn't like the first Jewish cookbook people were using in America, but the first one that was printed and published in America. Which is also very important. And it's notable because it's very much presented for sort of the upwardly mobile Jewish housewife, but it's specifically making a case that it's possible to be an upwardly mobile Jewish housewife, giving fancy dinners and the like, while maintaining a fully kosher menu. Now, interestingly, this was sort of an open conversation and question in Jewish communities in America in the middle to the late 19th century. The majority of early Jewish immigrants to the United States belonged to German Reform congregations, and so there was a lot of internal active conversation about whether and how much it was necessary to continue to follow kosher dietary laws. However, in this case, this cookbook is presenting a way to do so while also pursuing goals in American society.
If somebody had told me when we started doing this exhibition that the celery would be one of my favorite forms in the exhibit, along with the wonderful book that we're going to look at in a moment, I wouldn't have believed them. But this is actually Campbell, Jones & Company. I never heard of them before, from Pittsburgh. The pattern is called Rose Sprig, and it's American pressed glass. It's Vaseline glass, which means it's slightly radioactive. It's got a little uranium in there, and it dates to about 1886. And the main thing that I found fascinating was that I didn't know that the celery, when it looks like a vase instead of an oblong thing on the table, I didn't know that celery was so exotic in the 19th century, and it was served to guests. It was a real status food, so that was a real shock to me and an educational thing. And only wealthy people could afford to have this kind of food on their table. And it was often served between courses in Victorian fashion. However, I'm going to show you in just a moment a celery that's oblong. So when we look at what happened to the celery in its evolution, it went from being a fancy, exotic food holding container on your table, like a vase, to an oblong serving dish. And this would have been in the 20th century. And then later on, it pretty much disappeared from your table at all. So this is restaurant-ware, Shenango, China.
So celery was another piece where I initially had some trouble finding a textural match to it. I found lots of references to cooked celery and celery in soup and the like, but I really struggled to find instructions for how to put celery in a vase, which, you know, makes sense because you don't really need a whole lot of written instruction to put celery in a vase on a table. But then we came across this truly gorgeous frontispiece in the 1873 edition of the New Encyclopedia of Domestic Economy. And while it's quite unobtrusive, but if you look on the right-hand corner of the table between the blonde girl and the bearded gentleman, you can see the celery in a fairly plain vase, plainer than the one that we have on display. The other thing that I want to draw attention to in this frontispiece is, so first of all, cookbooks in the 19th century typically don't have color illustrations. So this is fairly unusual, and it's also unusual because we have the family sitting at the table, and then we have a black woman in the background bringing more dishes forward. Which is also unusual to see depicted visually. Now, there's no text that accompanies this. However, the illustration does reflect the structural divisions of the time. So to lay things out, in general, any woman in 1873 in America is more likely to be a servant than to manage servants. But black women in particular, even after the Civil War and Emancipation, often found that domestic service was the only means of earning money that was open to them in many cities. So this illustration is a really important reminder that in household guides and cookbooks, there's often a distinction and a mismatch between the presumed reader, usually the wife of the family, and the presumed cook or general maid who might actually be carrying out most of the steps described in that text.
When it comes to dinnerware, I love Art Deco. And in this case, this is a Royal Rochester modernistic breakfast set. And there's more pieces to the set that aren't shown here, coffee and tea and other things. But this one has a fantastic waffle iron, and look at the handle on that syrup. So these were made and debuted at Christmas season in 1928. And unfortunately, people in the United States were not yet accustomed to Art Deco style, and so they weren't very popular, they didn't sell very well, and they didn't manufacture very many of them, and so now they're quite rare today.
Now, I love waffles and I love Art Deco design, so this is my personal favorite item in the exhibit, and I really think that some contemporary waffle maker needs to do a revival of this pattern because I would absolutely buy it. But also, as I was looking for books in JBLCA to go along with this, I found this really fascinating pamphlet. It's a book, but just slightly more than a pamphlet, called Breakfast to Midnight: Recipes with Pabst-et. Well, what on earth is Pabst-et? So I had to look into that. And it turns out Pabst-et is a soft cheese, kind of like Velveeta, which Pabst Brewing Corporation started making during Prohibition. So Pabst was one of the most successful breweries in America in the late 19th and early 20th century. But like other breweries during Prohibition, they had to pursue other lines of manufacturing. So some companies went to making non-alcoholic drinks. There was one that made ice cream, and Pabst-et went hard into cheese, which makes sense because they were in Wisconsin, which is of course also known for dairy cows and cheese. And so this booklet was an attempt to say not only can you spread cheese on your crackers, you can use it in all kinds of baked goods, including waffles.
Here we're looking at a set of Fiesta ware that Homer Laughlin produced beginning in 1936, and now they've continually made Fiesta ware, well, almost continually up until the present, since 1936. These are the 6 original colors, and the set was designed by Frederick Hurton Reed. Now, what's most interesting to some people about this is that Fiestaware has the distinction of being one of the companies, because there were other companies at the time who made glazes like this orange-red color, which is radioactive. But what's interesting is that Homer Laughlin quit making this after 1942, because in 1942 they needed the orange color, the uranium, for making the atom bomb. Okay, here I am to demonstrate how radioactive this is. So I've got a Geiger counter here. Yes, it doesn't have to look like the thing Lucille Ball had on TV with a big car battery shaped thing. So right now it's at 0. Well, it was at 0. We'll zero it again. So it's at 0, so it's not registering anything. But we put it next to this Fiestaware cup. I'm moving here for you. So I think you can see that the uranium, even this was produced between 1936 and 1942, that the uranium is still very active. Now I will tell you that all of the colors that Fiestaware come in today are totally safe.
One of the strengths of JBLCA is our extensive and varied collection of charity cookbooks, which are cookbooks produced by a small group to raise money for a particular cause. So especially from the late 19th to the mid 20th century, a lot of women's groups produced them. So Delicious Recipes was published in 1932 by the Women's City Club of Oakland, and it has a really lovely Art Deco cover. You can see the sort of the sunburst lines at the bottom and the clean outlines of the woman's dress and the dishes on the table. I thought it was a lovely pairing. Also, in another echo of Prohibition, there is a recipe for booze cake in there, which doesn't call for any alcohol. Instead, it calls for liquid from raisins soaked in water, rather than the usual bourbon that you would find in that cake.
When I founded the International Museum of Dinnerware Design in 2012, one of the first sets I acquired was this set of Dion quintuplets. It's a cereal bowl and a set of spoons for each of the quintuplets. Now, they were born in Canada in 1934, and they were the first identical quintuplets known to have survived infancy at the time. And this bowl is commemorating their first birthday. It is chrome. It's going to reflect what you're looking at here. And it was a premium that you could get with an ad. There was an ad. I don't know if you can see this, but an ad that was available through Quaker Oats. So this would have been about 1935, and the spoons are Carlton silver plate. So basically the children were exploited and kept in a hospital that became a tourist site, and there were many other kinds of souvenirs, if I can put those in kind of air quotes for you. Unfortunately, their situation became emblematic for children's rights, and 2 of the quints survive today, and they're in their 80s.
So along with all of the material objects commemorating the Dion Quins, there were lots of advertisements for products that their images were used to promote. So as you page through the Ladies' Home Journal of the late 1930s, there are all of these illustrations of smiling, chubby toddlers with dark curls, extolling the benefits of things from Colgate toothpaste, Palmolive soap, and of course here, Caro's syrup. But again, this was, these happy images unfortunately cover a much less happy reality for the sisters. The surviving sisters in the late 90s wrote an open letter to the parents of the first surviving set of septuplets, urging them to protect their children's privacy and to not allow those children to experience what they went through.
So we're looking right now at Hall China's Tomorrow Classic, which was designed by Eva Zeisel in white, and it went into production in 1952. This was not only a beautiful design, but it was low in cost, and there were lots of different patterns that other designers put onto her plain white, plain isn't the right word, her beautiful white china. It was an immediate success, and in some people's opinion, it was the #1 selling dinnerware in the 1950s, very affordable for newlyweds. Eva wrote once, "Beauty is not an elitist enjoyment. The sunset's colors are for all to enjoy." And I think her designs reflect that, and in this case, quite reasonably so. Someone asked once whether or not the cups were installed here in this exhibition upside down. This is the egg cups. And no, they're not. You could use them either way. The one is a little bit oval shaped, the ones I have up, but that's how they're illustrated in the books about Eva, and where they show the outlines of the designs. They're always displayed that way.
So as I was looking through our mid-20th century cookbook for something to pair with the Zeisel dinnerware, I was struck by this one, Recipes for Two, which is really emblematic of a lot of the changes happening in cooking technology over, the 100 years from the mid-19th century to the mid-20th century. By this point in time, the average middle-class American housewife is much less likely to have hired help assisting her in the kitchen. She's also much less likely to be living in an extended family situation. So instead, here we have this cookbook, Recipes for Two, but with lots more equipment to assist. So electric or gas ovens, much easier to produce fancy cakes like the one that we see here. And a lot of the recipes in this cookbook look very useful, like scaled down recipes for chicken salad or apple salad and things like that. But then I burst out loud laughing when I came to the cream puffs that produce exactly 4 cream puffs. So I would like to meet the person who decides they're going to go to all the effort to make cream puffs and makes only 4 of them.
So here's Glidden pottery made in Alfred, New York between 1951 and 1955. This particular set was made then. So these are poodle dishes. Chi-Chi poodle is the name. And that thing with the handle on it is a shirred egg server. You might not recognize it. You might think it's a fry pan, but it's a shirred egg server. And the decorator was June Chisholm. Each piece is hand-painted, and no 2 poodles are alike. They looked at a model of what it looked like, but they are not alike. And I should tell you that poodles were the most popular breed of dogs in the 1950s. And some say that Lucille Ball had a poodle haircut, so maybe that hairstyle was related. But anyway, she was born in Jamestown, New York, about 100 miles from Alfred, and she knew about Glidden pottery. And indeed, she and Desi Arnaz had a set of Glidden pottery that was in a different pattern, not a poodle, a feather pattern. And if you look at old I Love Lucy episodes, you will see Glidden pottery on the coffee table. Sometimes she's putting out a cigarette in the shirred egg server on the table, using it as an ashtray. And what I like best about the notebook that it's paired with, Juli will probably talk about this, is that in this booklet, which was sponsored by a cigarette company or a tobacco company, everybody used to smoke back then, and in the catalog, in the booklet, she's smoking. And the weirdest thing for me was all the little recipes and vignettes that have the tableware on the table there. There's almost always a little cigarette container or a place for matches or an ashtray.
Actor and producer Lucille Ball is best remembered for her title role in I Love Lucy, which of course is what is referenced here in Lucy's Notebook, which is written in the persona of the television character Lucy McGillicuddy Ricardo, a housewife who longs for fame and is accompanied by her husband, Ricky Ricardo, a band leader, which is played by Lucille Ball's real-life husband, Desi Arnaz, also a producer and a band leader. So it's very lighthearted, it's delightful, it is also completely filled with pictures of them smoking. So not only this book itself, but also the television show was sponsored by Philip Morris, and you can see this lovely picture at the end where it also says that you'll find that they are perfect too for those cigarette breaks when your housework gets ahead of you, the dishes aren't washed, Junior bumps his head, and your husband calls to say he's bringing home 3 utter strangers for dinner.
It seems kind of illogical, but the Northern Industrial Chemical Company made the dishes that you're looking at right here, and they were designed by the famous designer Russell Wright. The pattern is called Ming Lace Leaves, and it was created between 1959 to 62, and it was part of the Flair series. He had a lifelong preoccupation with nature, and he was also obsessed with combining new materials and natural imagery, and this dinnerware line shows that to the total extent. Inside each of these plates are tinted leaves of the jade orchid tree, an imported plant from China that was embedded in each piece individually. So here I'm showing you another plate that looks like it might be similar, and it is similar. Can you see that? And what it shows you is that just like the poodle dishes, no 2 poodles were alike because they were hand painted. Well, in this case, These plastic or Melmac dishes were created with none of the dishes being alike. They look similar, but they're not completely alike or not identical.
So paired with these dishes, we have a 1945 book called How to Cook and Eat in Chinese, which was an immensely popular book bringing instruction in various types of Chinese dishes to the American middle class. It was written by Buai-Yang Chow, who was a member of a prestigious family in China who lived a very unusual life. She had the support of an open-minded grandfather, and she was able to reject an arranged betrothal, and in fact trained at Tokyo Women's Medical College, which is where in the book she says she learned to cook because she missed the foods that she had in China so much she had to learn to make them herself while she was living in Japan. And then later she immigrated to the United States with her husband, who is a very well-known linguist. So this cookbook is a technically masterful and linguistically witty collaboration among the family members. Both her husband and her daughter were heavily involved, and they coined a number of terms that we use today, like pot stickers and stir fry in English. So in the latter case, the authors describe the technique, saying, may be defined as a big fire, shallow fat, continually stirring, quick frying of cut up material with wet seasoning. We shall call it stir fry, or stir for short.
The set that you're looking at right now, it was made by the Ideal Toy Company. And Russell Wright, who we just looked at his Melmac ware, he designed this child's toy plastic dish set and related glassware, even though it's plastic and cutlery. It's an exact copy of the adult ceramic American Modern Dinnerware, which was made between 1939 and 1959. This set dates from the mid-1950s because it was designed specifically for his daughter Annie to play with. And this was part of a Just Like Mommy's ad campaign. So the child's dishes in the adult version had colors with wonderful names such as granite, coral, and chartreuse. And I brought a set, because I can't reach inside the case here, to show you the difference and similarity of the two pieces. So here's the adult ceramic, granite colored cup, and here's the plastic one like the one in the case here. Just Like Mommy's.
So paired with the children's toy dishes, we have Betty Crocker's Cookbook for Boys and Girls in the 1957 edition. So if you don't know the name Betty Crocker from cookbooks, you probably recognize it from cake mixes in the aisle at the grocery store. However, Betty Crocker was never actually a real person at all. The advertising department of Washburn Crosby Company, later General Mills, created the persona in 1921 so there would be a single name under which staff could respond to requests for culinary and household advice. However, over subsequent years and decades, various actors played Betty Crocker on the radio and on television, and she was reimagined numerous times throughout the 20th century for illustrated cookbooks, both adults and children's cookbooks.
This is one of my favorite objects in the whole exhibition. This is Aladdin Industry Incorporated's loaf of sliced bread tin lunchbox circa 1968. The company that created this is famous for creating character lunchboxes with Superman, the Jetsons, and Mickey Mouse on them. It's kind of a pop art style. Now, bread's been around for quite a while, but this pre-sliced bread was first available in 1928. And there's a lunchbox just like this one in the Smithsonian Institution's National Museum of American History in Washington, D.C.
So paired with our bread lunchbox, we have the Peanuts Lunch Bag Cookbook from 1970. So in the early 20th century, most children who attended school went home for their noon meal. But by the 60s and 70s, many ate lunch at school, whether as part of burgeoning school lunch programs or from bags and boxes brought from home. So in the case, you saw the hardcover edition of this book. Here I'm holding the paperback. And on the back, it has a really delightful comic. There's comics throughout it that says, "My mother is always complaining about having to make lunches. What's so hard about it? This morning I told her I'd make my own lunch. And I did too. See, I made my own lunch. 8 candy bars." But if you turn inside, there are no candy bar lunch recipes, but there are all kinds of sandwich fillings like Charlie's cheese sandwiches, Linus loves liverwurst sandwiches, and things like that. So this one, you can get lots of copies on your own in Abe Books. So if you want to eat lunch like Charlie Brown, you too could do so.
Thank you so much for attending this event this evening. I want to thank Juli for her collaboration and inviting the museum to be part of this. And of course, I want to thank Jan Longone for her legacy to all of us. I wanted to mention one thing about the exhibition before I turn this over to Juli, and that is that I learned this really important lesson, because occasionally people will ask me, would you like my old cereal bowl, or would you like this or that, and maybe it's got a chip or a crack or something, and they tell me a story about how they used it at breakfast for 40 years or something, and they're turning it over to the museum. And I probably took it, and then other people said, oh, I only collect things that are in mint condition. And of course, I would love to take things in that are in pristine condition for posterity. But I learned from this exhibition that my cookbooks have writing in them, the dates that I tried a recipe and little variations and ticking off things as I put the ingredients in the thing. So I learned that, you know, cookbooks are used and loved, and you can write in them just like a textbook in school. And therefore, it's okay for a museum devoted to celebrating dining to take in dinnerware that has a chip or a crack or something occasionally, because it shows that it was loved and used by all of you. So thank you very much.
Yes, I always tell people that I either want books that are in really stellar condition or that are in interestingly bad condition. I especially love the cookbooks that come in with notes and annotations and crossed out recipes, and sometimes even children practicing arithmetic or little drawings in them. It really shows how those books functioned in the life of the home. And I want to thank Margaret for the chance to curate this exhibit together. It was an absolutely wonderful experience. It was very prolonged. We started planning this before the pandemic happened, and so we're really happy to have gotten here at last. And I also want to thank everyone who helped bring this exhibit together, especially Randall Stegmeyer and Margaret herself for taking photographs, and Brooke Murphy, Jeff Gilbo, Jess Ortegan, and Shannon Zachary from the Library's Conservation Department as well for support in making this exhibit a reality.
Thank you.
All right, welcome back, everyone. So we're going to open things up for question and answer. You're welcome to use the raise hand function, simply unmute your mic, or use the chat function, and my colleague Evan Kropp will be monitoring the chat to let us know questions that come in that way. We do have a couple things we want to mention before we open up question and answer. I wanted to give a quick plug to our October After Hours event, which will be coming up in about a month. So if you look at the library's website, you'll find information on that event. That one, and Evan just put it in the chat, that one does not require registration. It is happening physically on the 6th floor in Special Collections. So Evan Kropp, who's the curator of Islamic manuscripts, will be leading a conversational exploration of an Arabic devotional compendium, Dalat el Herat, the signpost to goodness and the dawning of radiance and remembrance to ask blessings upon the chosen prophet. So do check that out. And then I think, Margaret, you had something you wanted to mention as well.
Oh no, I mentioned it already, so I'm ready.
I'll cover it. Okay.
I don't know if I have answers, but I'll take a question.
Okay, it looks like Pat has a hand raised, Juli and Margaret. Pat, would you like to unmute?
Thank you. What a fun presentation. I wanted to show you my very own Betty Crocker cookbook for boys and girls. It is not the one I grew up with. That one, I think, as I got to be a teenager, I thought I was much, was beneath me in terms of age, so I tossed it. This one I found at a yard sale somewhere. The cover is ripped. I'm looking for one in better condition, but I refuse to look online for it. The very first cake I ever baked was from this book, and I just love it. You may have said this in the beginning, but forgive me if now after hearing your presentation, seeing your presentation, I will ask again. But how long did it take to decide on the dinnerware or the artifacts and the book? And especially for you, Julia, how did you even know where to look? Did the books come first, or how did it work? Thanks.
Sure. So it didn't happen all at once. I mean, we actually started talking to each other back, I think, in 2018, 18 even maybe. So there were some off and on conversations. We originally were thinking of various specifically themed ideas. Like at one point we were going to do an entire Art Deco themed exhibit. And then the pandemic happened and we were talking again and thinking about this current exhibit, and I went over to view the dinnerware collection, and a lot of it was just Margaret brought out all of these amazing things with amazing stories, and I kept getting excited and saying, we've got to include this one, Margaret, we've got to include this one. And we decided that everyone could really use sort of a lighthearted exhibit after the last couple of years, so we just decided to bring out some of these really interesting stories together. And when it came to coming up with the books to pair with them, I usually just started with a date search in the library catalog. You can limit in the advanced search to special collections, the Janice, Bluestein, Longone Culinary Archive, and then I would try to look to see, okay, what do we have that's around that time period? And then I would go to the shelf and start spending some more time. And especially I spent a lot of time looking for what would be visually interesting, because the thing about cookbooks is that for much of their history, they're very functional documents, right? And also have to be kept moderately affordable. So there are lavishly illustrated cookbooks, but not a whole lot of them. And also the use of color tends to mostly come later. And food photography really doesn't come into its own until I would say the 80s or 90s. So I spent a lot of time finding things that I thought would visually pair with the china.
Well, you did a great job on that. Thanks.
Yeah, thank you.
Wonderful, thank you. So we have a question in the chat here, and I will go ahead and read this. Our questioner says, I have an interest in a subset of dining, that being coffee and all the ways equipment it can be made. I also have several cookbooks devoted entirely to coffee. Are there niche items such as this in either collection featured today?
Oh, you saw everything that's in the exhibit. So there was an Eva Zeisel teapot, but not the coffee pot that goes with it. We have all kinds of things to do with coffee, and we did a show actually at Zingerman's, one of our earliest shows in the early it was after 2013 anyway, at Zingerman's Coffee, which showed coffee, mostly coffee sets with cups and saucers and coffee pots and things like that. We didn't, because Zingerman's is all about all the accoutrements and good coffee and all that. So we ignored that part and we dealt more with dinnerware pieces, and probably not exactly what you're talking about. I'm sure in the library there must be all kinds of, in the Longone collection, all kinds of coffee related things.
Absolutely. You are by no means alone in your affection and interest in coffee. So there's quite a lot that's been published on both coffee and tea. So both books, but then also another part of JBLCA is our ephemera collection, which is just, we have over 200 boxes of advertising ephemera. And one of the set headings for that is coffee and tea.
Have we lost our questions?
I have one
that was asked earlier, and not earlier right now, but before we gave this talk, some people sent requests in, questions that they had. And one of them had to do with, someone was worried about using their china because they were worried about the lead in their dinnerware. Now, I wish I had that exact question in front of me, but I don't. But in general, I talked to my husband, who's a ceramic engineer, and I did mention the dangers of old Fiesta ware, even though some people even dispute the uranium part. But to do with lead, my husband said that basically companies in the United States were really careful in their manufacturing and testing of their products to make sure that they were safe to be used in all different conditions. Now, this is more recent, so maybe if you have something older, that might be an issue. And I think if you were, and just because there's lead in something doesn't mean that it's something that comes out and interferes with your enjoyment of the food. Like, it might not be dangerous, it's contained. It might make the surface different or something, but it isn't dangerous. And then if you're really worried about it, no matter whose dinnerware you have, I would suggest getting a lead testing kit where you can find out whether your dinnerware is safe. And I think for myself, there's only a few people's wares that I might be leery of, and I don't even have too many of these in the collection. And that would be like dinnerware that was made, like a casserole. Somebody gave me one early on that was a casserole that was made in Mexico, and it was low fired and, you know, like terracotta, and had a lead glaze over it. You could see the lead glaze on it. And I wouldn't eat off of that. I probably wouldn't cook something in it. And I have one story about lead glazes from a potter that I met years ago in Kansas. And he had told me how, and he was very successful. He was a professor at a university, and he had been spending years trying to replicate, this has to do with cooking. So he was trying to replicate a recipe that I think his mother or his aunt or his grandmother had. And he did that faithfully, was reproducing with all the ingredients and went to all the trouble, and it never tasted the same. And it wasn't until on a trip back to Italy where he realized that the dish, when it was prepared in Italy, was prepared in a lead glazed piece. And that lead, which is sweet, has a sweet taste when it leaches out, had given the dish a sweet taste, which he was never able to duplicate in a dish that wasn't lead glazed. And so I guess that would be a serious lesson to learn about. Maybe your food doesn't taste quite the same as in the mother country, but it might be safer to eat. So.
Wow, that's incredible. Oh, thank you. So we have a few other questions. We had an outpouring of questions. One of our attendees is asking if they'll be able to re-watch the recording, and I believe that will be the case, right? Because it should be posted to the Dinnerware Museum website. Is that correct?
Yes.
Okay, wonderful.
Whenever Juli sends it over, it'll be alive, and we'll advertise that it's available. And we have all our Zoom recordings front and center on our website.
Beautiful, beautiful. Okay, so another question. Is there any contemporary dinnerware or food cooking books you'd want to see included in an exhibit in another 100 years?
Is that all the ones we rejected, Juli? There was an awful lot. It's kind of like a puzzle. Don't you think it's like a puzzle? You just start with one object or the other, and then your mind just goes crazy thinking of all the connections between the two things. And I'm actually doing a talk, I'll give a plug for in October for the Culinary Historians of Ann Arbor. And it's called A Decade of Delicious Dishes or something unique, some kind of title like that. And it traces all the connections that I see in the museum and have worked on over the last decade, which talking about all the connections between dining and food and recipes and actual cuisine and all of that. So we have a lot of fun with that kind of thing. So you've given me something else to think about tonight.
Yeah, I mean, certainly there's 1,000 exhibits we could do with other materials. Now, if I'm thinking about like things that are contemporary to right now that are coming out, I mean, this is also a challenge from a collecting perspective, actually, because what is the biggest way that people get recipes right now? It's on the internet. It's through food websites, through food blogs, and so on. And some libraries are capturing that. I previously worked at UT San Antonio, and we had a web archiving program that did include capturing archives of certain Mexican cooking blogs, because that collection focused specifically on Mexican and Texan cooking. That is not part of JBLCA's current collecting mandate. It gets very big, very fast. But it is something that I certainly think about. And so I think in 100 years, I would hope that somebody somewhere is able to capture some of the food blogs from today. On the other hand, very successful food bloggers are often able to translate that into printed cookbooks and contracts for sort of being a if you will, traditionally published author. And so, like, for example, I'm thinking of the Homesick Texan is the one that rises to the top of my mind, but I know there's been lots of others as well. So I would want to feature some of those. Now I'm much less familiar with current dinnerware, so I'm not so sure about what I would choose for that.
Well, I think too that if you're talking about current dinnerware, you can also be talking about contemporary artists, and we don't just collect manufactured dinnerware. That's usually, or that's actually what's mostly in this exhibition, but we do lots of work with contemporary artists that mostly clay, but glass and some other makers. And so like our upcoming exhibition in 2023 is an invitational and juried exhibition called Entomophagous Dining, which basically is eating insects. So we've invited some artists, and then it's an open juried exhibition for people to make artwork. Doesn't matter if it's clay or design work on paper, design boards, whatever. And we have a call for entry for that. And that has to do with I think, what's happening now and in the future, which is using insects for protein. And this also explores the beauty of insects too, because I've had some people I invited said, well, I'm a vegetarian and I'm not going to eat an insect or something. And so I said, well, but you appreciate it. So it'll be not only the dining on it, but so I think exhibitions like that, and I'm sure that Juli probably has already in the archives, books that have something about dining on insects. So it's kind of looking to the future of what people may be doing to feed the people in the world. So one aspect.
Yeah, very cool. Very interesting to project forward 100 years. So we have another question related to care and handling. So what sort of care and handling skills are needed for handling such old dinnerware and books? And has there been a learning curve as you've stayed in the field?
Well, I have one thing to say about that before Juli answers this. And that is I learned from her when we did the first viewing of the actual books and journals from the Longone archives that we were going to be using in the collection. They were brought out. Back in the day when I was trained, you were wearing white gloves, cotton gloves, and had a pencil in your hand, and you didn't go in an archives without those two things. Apparently times have changed and my fingerprints aren't as scary as they used to be. But from the standpoint of dinnerware, there's very few things that I would like you to be holding with white gloves, because you're much more likely it's slippery and to drop it. So that really hasn't changed. There's things like lusterware and some little niche things in ceramics that, and I would have to say, when we have a lot of works on paper and fiber and things in our collection, and I still prefer to have white gloves on those artworks, handling them carefully, even though I can see the fact that the fiber could catch on the glove or something like that. So so even I am learning from the best.
Yes, I mean, we're still very pro pencil in special collections. We have lots of extras because most people no longer carry pencils around with them everywhere, but we can provide you all with pencils should you come to special collections. But gloves, as with the dinnerware being slippery, sort of the opposite problem, as you say, the gloves can catch on the paper. And so by and large, for most paper objects, we prefer that people not use gloves because you're more likely to tear the pages, especially if, let's say, you're wearing gloves and maybe they don't really quite fit you, and then you're trying to turn these really thin, brittle pages from the late 19th and early 20th century. But there's always sort of oddball things that you might encounter, and you have to figure out how to handle them. We have a cookie cutter collection, which also includes gingerbread, and it's pretty desiccated, fortunately, but there's a lot of special collections out there that have food as artifacts in them, and figuring out the storage for that is always an interesting conversation with conservation.
All right, wonderful. Thank you both. So we've had a question about how long the exhibit will be up at the library, and I believe that should be until the 29th of September, correct?
Yeah.
And that will be at Hatcher in the Audubon room. Okay, and then Dan asked, have the cookbooks been digitized? Are they available via HathiTrust?
So by and large, no, because most of these are still in copyright, being in the mid-1920s or later. I would have to look. It's possible that the Lydia Maria Child cookbook, American Frugal Housewife, might be in HathiTrust and might be digitized. If it is, if you find it in the University of Michigan Library catalog, then the catalog record will include information about the physical copy and special collections, but we'll also link to HathiTrust. So you can check those out, but by and large, most of these unfortunately are not easily available online.
All right, wonderful. And we have another question. So should we continue to use old and sentimental dinnerware at home or save it for historical purposes?
The best answer for that, if you have something really, really rare, like maybe your family has Sev or I don't know, something made for the Russian Tsar or something, donate it to my museum or the Historical Society or somebody. Don't use it, but in general, I tell people to enjoy what they have, and I think most people do. A lot of collectors collect to actually use like mid-century modern dinnerware. They're using it. They're using the tablecloths, the flatware, designed by Eva Zeisel, Russell Wright, all these people, and enjoy it. I think the caution is about putting things in dishwashers or microwaves, and that would be once if it has like a metal silver gold banding on it or something, don't put it in the microwave. I wouldn't put it in the dishwasher either. So I mean, it's just being careful with whatever you have and enjoying it. And I think more of the problem is that a lot of people have what they consider heirloom china, and the current generations of young people aren't really interested in having a lot of possessions and taking care of those things. So it's finding a good home for them, which is another reason to use your china in case nobody wants it in the future. And I love looking at pictures. So if you've got something you think you want to donate or something, go ahead and direct her at dinnerwaremuseum.org. And I'd love to look at it, but send a picture. Don't just tell me what it is.
All right, excellent. Thank you for that, Margaret. Very generous advice. So I know that we had one of our registrants who submitted a question regarding any plans for memorializing or celebrating Jan Longone. Juli, would you like to share more about that?
Sure, I can take that. Yes, so we don't have anything I can give you a date on right now. The library definitely wants to plan some things in Jan's honor and Jan's memory. No, right now, her family is still working on plans for their own celebration of her life. But at some point in the future, hopefully maybe in the spring, the library will hopefully also be planning something. So you can keep an eye on the library events website. I'm sure anything that we plan will be there.
Wonderful. All right, thank you both. This has been such a fabulous conversation. I think that's all the questions that we've seen come over in the chat. Unless anyone has any final questions, I see that it's 5. So final remarks.
Thank you all so much for joining us. This exhibit was such a joy to put together. I've learned so much from Margaret, and I'm really happy you all joined us here this evening.
So go to your cupboards and get out your dishes and your cookbooks and make us all proud.
Make something delicious tonight.
Yes. Thank you very much.
Bye.